welcome to the Sunday Guardian podcast by Joyeeta Basu. Viewers, as you know, there is a lot of turmoil going on in the UK over what they are calling the grooming gangs, primarily comprising Pakistani Muslim men. Basically, the word they may be using is grooming, but let's be frank, these are all gang rape gangs. And they have been preying on young girls, vulnerable young girls, and they have they've destroyed the lives of perhaps thousands and thousands. According to one estimate, apparently more than almost 500,000 girls have been affected by these grooming gangs. Now, at the same time, there is a certain degree of coyness among the British mainstream media, among British politicians. They're not talking much about it. They are talking about these are not Pakistani men, they are talking about Asian men. Are you talking about Japanese men? Are you talking about Indian men? So you see, a lot of voices are being raised across the globe. Primarily, of course, we know Elon Musk has become very active about this and he wants Keir Starmer's removal. To discuss all this and much more, I have a very special guest with me today. I have Ambassador Yashvardhan Sinha, who was former Indian High Commissioner to the UK, among his many other postings. And of course, post retirement, he was Chief Information Commissioner of India. And when in the MEA, he was also heading the Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iran division. So he will be here. He's here. Thank you, Ambassador Sinha, for being on the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, now the thing is, first question is, of course, what is this controversy? How do you see this controversy that is going on, and how complicit in terms of silence, this conspiracy of silence that the UK, the British political class, has been indulging in over this?
I think it's a very serious issue and quite shameful for such a thing to have happened in a developed country like the United Kingdom. And this happened some decades, a couple, two, 3 decades ago, particularly during the turn of the century. And from 97, I believe, to about 2008, there was this case in Rotherham where 1,400 girls, some of them not even adults, I mean pre-adults, or most of them, as young as 11, etc., were exploited for lack of a more sensitive word, gang rape. And it was, I think, a really shameful chapter in Britain's history. Uh, the unfortunate part was that even though this was known, and local inquiries were held. But to be politically correct and not to be classified as racist or Islamophobic, they basically covered up. And I'm talking about the law enforcement authorities, I'm talking about local councils, I'm talking about politicians, governments, etc., which is shameful. And finally, when this matter did sort of cause enough uproar, there was an inquiry, a report by a professor, a Scottish professor, if I remember correctly, Alexis J. And if you read his report, it's actually quite shocking. In Rotterdam alone, I think he talks about 1,400 recorded cases or girls being uh, raped and sexually exploited, intimidated, brutal violence unleashed against them. And also, people were scared to report these matters because of fear of either violence or, as I said, it was not politically correct to do it. And for now, even now, we mentioned Mr. Musk. Mr. Musk, of course, has highlighted this in his social media writings recently, but this was well known and it's been known for a long time in the UK. But I think the reaction also of the British government, and specifically, I think the Prime Minister talked about Asian gangs, and you mentioned this, and it was really surprising because this desire to sort of, I won't use the word whitewash, but to try and mitigate the crimes committed by spreading the blame, really, because Asians, as you correctly said, Asia, the largest continent of this globe, and you cannot include everybody in Asia. They were primarily Pakistani people of Pakistani heritage. The report says so. It's not you and I saying so. It's there. Professor Jay's report talks about that, and the media is full of it. But I mean, they don't want to say it openly. I wonder why.
And in fact, Keir Starmer has been accused by Elon Musk himself that he himself was basically trying to ensure that there was some attempt of cover up, perhaps. So Keir Starmer's role has been pretty, I would say, negative in this case, and not just him. When we are talking about the British political class, what we saw, everybody voted against almost a huge number of chunk of their MPs. They voted against a national inquiry, which is absolutely shocking.
Yes, absolutely. I think I don't want to specifically target Prime Minister Starmer because he was director of prosecution, I think, between
Yes.
1998
Mhm.
and 2007 or 8 or 13, I forget. But there were cases that were brought. So it would be unfair to target him personally, I feel. But yes, the political class certainly needs to share the blame. And here it's across party lines, really. I mean, mainly the Labour governments that were in power at that point of time. But even later, when the reports were out and when people got to know the extent of the crimes committed, and not just in Rotherham, but in Telford, in Oldham, and elsewhere in England, the corrective action, I'm sure some corrective action was taken, but a great deal needs to be done and has not been done. And if you see from the people prosecuted, the numbers are not very large. And the sentences, of course, that's a legal matter. That's for the courts to decide. But you will see that doesn't appear to be proportionate to the crimes committed, or at least the extent of the crimes committed. And the bill that was defeated recently in the House of Commons, you even had some Tory members of South Asian heritage who actually voted against a national inquiry. So, I mean, I could only think of one thing, that it's obviously vote bank politics at play.
So you have seen it from close quarters. How bad is the vote bank politics in the UK? What did you see in your time, and how has this situation come to such a pass?
But I'd like to preface my remarks by saying that in a democracy, in any democracy, in any vibrant democracy, I mean, issues of vote bank politics, etc., do come up. Pandering to certain interests do happen. So I think we should be slightly fair in this assessment. But yes, in the UK, I noticed particularly that certain parties, at least one political party, was openly pandering to the views of the people we are talking about, the Mirpuris, the Kashmiris, the Pakistanis, etc., and adopting positions which were anti India in their annual party resolutions, etc. And to be fair again to Prime Minister Starmer, when he took over the leadership of the Labour Party, he did try and correct some of the very open biases and the very anti India positions that the Labour Party was taking.
They also had Jeremy Corbyn before that, and he
Yes.
was, I think, one of the main proponents of that pro Pakistan, anti India line that he was hoping that the Labour would take.
Whether it was him personally, because I know him, I
Hmm.
met him personally, whether it was him or the coterie around him
Hmm.
that was responsible, the fact is it was under his leadership that the party, I mean, if you don't forget that even before he came to power, you remember the Labour Party was adopting positions. I remember when Her Majesty, the late Majesty Queen Elizabeth, had visited India in the 90s, I think 97. If you recall, the Foreign Secretary had made a statement about Kashmir, which actually caused a lot of problems for the UK and embarrassed the Queen herself, really, during that visit to India and Pakistan.
So, when we are talking about vote banks can happen only when a certain section has a decisive influence on any electoral uh, outcome. So, in this case, if we are talking about the Pakistanis and the Pakistani and also the Bangladeshis and all, so automatically that would also mean demographic change. So, would you say what is the situation in the UK right now that they can get a man of Pakistani origin elected as mayor of London? Apart from that, there are places where I mean, they have a very, I would say, important say in electing a particular candidate. What kind of demographic change is the UK witnessing?
Again, I think the example you cited of Sadiq Khan being mayor, I think is actually a good example where the shows UK as a very open society, a very tolerant society, open to new ideas, immigrants, etc. And to the credit of the United Kingdom, you had an Indian origin prime minister, you had two Indian origin home secretaries, you had Pakistani origin chancellor and a Pakistani origin mayor. So that is actually a good, I mean, good reflection of society as a whole to show what they stand for, their value systems. However, the problem arises when you have certain areas where ghettos exist, where there's a concentration of particular community or ethnicity, and they vote en bloc for a candidate or a party, and that's when pandering to the demands of these communities comes into play, and vote back politics occur. So this actually happened during in the Midlands, north of the Midlands, in up to Leeds, Lancaster, Manchester, etc. Areas where pockets where such communities were strong, and they voted en bloc on the wishes of their leaders, whoever their leaders were. So that created a situation where political parties then would vie for the votes. There were other communities, probably larger in number, not necessarily in that area, but I'm referring, for instance, to the Indian origin community. But I think we weren't voting or block for one or the other issue or one or other party. We were like any other community dispersed across the United Kingdom and voting, for their personal likes and political ideologies, and reflecting the concerns that they have, and who best to vote for the party, the candidate, and what they stood for. So, I mean, which happens should happen in most democracies.
Yeah, but at the same time, when we are looking at it that way in terms of vote banks and all, it is it a fact that it is being said now that there when it Indians also primarily were voting Labour because of issues in terms of they were seen as more liberal, more open towards immigrants, but gradually as Labour has become more pro a particular religion, Indians in a large scale they are shifting away from labor and going towards the conservatives. And apart from that, of course, this will be the second part of the question in terms of what we saw last to last year, the Leicester riots. All right, it seems that there are many malign influences and malign forces in the UK, which are being basically, I would say, supported by sections of the Labour Party, which are acting against Hindus, primarily Indian Hindus and all. So, would you say is that your assessment, or what do you have to say about that?
No, I think as far as acting against Hindus are concerned, that's I think a very broad sort of allegation, I would say. But more importantly, I think Indians, and I'm not making a distinction between Hindus and Muslims
Yes.
and Christians, etc. But Indians, by and large, are a very peaceful community. They live peacefully and they contribute. For instance, the stats that I had, the Indian origin people were about 3% of UK's population as per the 2021 census, if I recall correctly. And they contribute over 6% to the country's GDP. So, one of the reasons why Indians are different is because one, they have been climbing up the food chain, the value chain. They have been contributing, they have been moving up into the ladder, so to speak. And as a result, their interests, their concerns have changed over time. Initially, they mainly came in as blue collared workers. They supported the Labour Party because the Labour Party stood for greater openness and was welcoming of immigrants. On the other hand, the conservatives didn't have that reputation, but slowly things changed. And I think, particularly during David Cameron's stewardship of the Conservative Party, it had started earlier, but certainly It accelerated during him and his tenure as Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party and his successors. That a large number of the Indian origin voters in the UK, a significant number, shifted loyalty from Labour to the Tories. And I said earlier it was because one, they had moved up the food chain and the jobs that they were doing. The Conservative Party more accurately reflected their needs and their concerns. And two, as you pointed out, that the Labour Party was getting increasingly hostage to a certain section of voters who were promoting basically an anti-Indian agenda, apart from various other agendas that they were promoting.
So, does this endanger Indians, I would say, does this endanger Indians in the UK or people of Indian origin? Because you see, there is this, these Khalistanis have also started now, become very vocal, very active. There was an attack on the High Commission 2019. And then after that, and this that took place, by the way, under when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. It was the Conservatives who were in power. And it seems that there is deliberate, I would say, turning a blind eye to the plight of the Indians. At least, you see, that is how it gets highlighted in India. That is how it gets talked about in India. That perhaps, okay, we know about Rishi Sunak and all that. But the fact of the matter is that this pressure that is coming from these vote banks or this particular vote bank of both the parties now, because they are also winning that particular section of their community. So the thing is it going to affect Indians in any way, or is it affecting in Indians in any way?
You see, I think that would be a very broad conclusion to reach. I wouldn't go that far at all, because the one, the Indians are numerous. They are people of Indian origin are in very large numbers there. They hold important positions in government, in business, and in society in general. I mean, if I remember correctly, 25% of the NHS doctors and paramedics were of Indian origin. So, I mean, I wouldn't say that the Indian community is under threat, but certainly what happened in Leicester a few years ago, and what happens in localized incidents certainly reflect poorly on the law and order, law enforcement agencies, and the way they've been able to control this. You mentioned a very important point: the nexus between the so-called Khalistanis and these jihadis, and then that is something real that is happening. It's not new; it's been happening for a while, but that is worrisome simply because you have a division that is appearing, or at least an attempt is being made to divide people of Indian origin, which is not good. Uh, I still feel that the Khalistani, the so-called Khalistanis are a small minority there in the UK, but they're a very vocal minority, and they have support, and they have support across borders. I mean, you see organizations are active not just in the UK but in other Western countries also. That certainly is a matter of concern for us, and I think the government of India is acutely aware, I think, of this problem, which is a real threat to our own security, not just the Indian communities residing in those countries, but also to the security of our own country, India.
Oh, the thing is, you see, when we are talking about, of course, the what exactly is the attitude or approach of the UK government and governments, I would say, successive governments towards these forces when it comes to India specifically, when seen through the lens of India?
You see, free speech
Hmm.
is something that we all believe in. All democracies believe in speech, but we shouldn't be selective when we invoke free speech. For instance, when Mr. Musk invokes his right to free speech, you see the reaction in the countries that he has referred to. But when we object to people who are propagating the breakup of India, who have been given a license to say what they feel like, and not just say what they feel like, to indulge in violence against diplomatic missions, that is completely contrary to, I presume, the local law and order and rules and regulations in that particular country, but also very much against the Vienna Convention on diplomatic relations. So I think there's an obligation on the part of these countries to control these hotheads and not give them the space under the guise of free speech and freedom of expression, because that leads to violence and it has led to violence. So I personally feel that these governments certainly need to do much more to control such elements.
So, here one question comes to my mind in terms of this. There are so many of these economic fugitives who run away to the UK, and it's next to impossible to ensure that they are, they can be extradited. Vijay Mallya is sitting there, and this case has been going on for years now. What exactly is the Indian government doing about it, and are they doing it deliberately, not sending him back? What is going on?
Well, if you see the record of, in the UK in particular, and
Yes,
I'm talking
UK.
about the UK
UK.
only, the UK's record in extraditing fugitives from law, Indian fugitives from law, has been quite dismal. We've hardly had a couple, I think a cricket bookie that had been sent some years ago, but the record is actually quite bad. And it's not that the Indian government has not. I was there when some of the cases that you mentioned were being actively pursued. And to credit to the Crown Prosecution Service, in one particular case, they got a conviction right up to the highest court of the land. But unfortunately, the extradition now is being stalled on some other grounds. I believe asylum requests. I'm not sure because I left the UK some years ago. But from what I read and what I understand, that there are other procedural issues that prevent extradition in this one particular case, but there are other cases too. So I think uh, it's important for the UK to realize that increasingly it's not just India, but there are other countries, fugitives from law, who are settling down there and pretty much operating with impunity. That is not good because that gives, after all, London is a global financial center and a very important hub in the Western world. And I think the impression should not go around, and I don't think that's the intention of anyone there, that it's a safe haven for fugitives. But it should not be a safe haven for fugitives.
How serious is the UK about its relationship with India?
I think the UK realizes how important relationship, bipartisan support. I think they even Sir Keir Starmer's government has made some very good noises in terms of further building relations with India. Relations are very strong, as you know, across. It's an all-encompassing relationship across various fields, whether it's science and technology, health, or I mean, the five pillars that were identified by the previous government when we both the governments agreed on a roadmap for 2030 was health, trade, climate, science and technology, and defense. So that pretty much covers the entire gamut of activity, and I think a lot is happening. What is in focus, obviously, is an FTA, a free trade agreement, and I think, if I recall correctly, when our prime ministers met at the margins of the G20 in Rio last year in November, I think they decided to move ahead. And I think this year we hopefully will see some sort of light at the end of the tunnel as far as the FTA is concerned.
Yeah, if you can shed some light. So, you think both parties, even we had heard this about the FTA, that even Rishi Sunak will get it done because it seemed, and there was some opposition from within apparently the government and the Conservative Party. What is the current status? Would you and is the Labour, is this particular Sturmer's government, are they keen on an FTA?
I think any government would be, because it's a win-win situation for both. If you remember when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, he had said by Diwali of, I think it was 2021 or 2022, I forget. That was unrealistic, I thought, because there were impediments on the way, but we managed to narrow down our differences quite a bit. I mean, there are sticking points, obviously.
What are the
Uh,
sticking points?
well, as far as I know, I mean, there were some problems regarding the high tariffs on alcohol, on automobiles. From our side, mobility is a key issue. Whether it's business mobility or whether our students go there, etc. So these are issues that need to be thrashed out. Uh, I'm hopeful that something will be done because it's in the interest of both the countries. UK post Brexit needs sort of FTA that India is now has overtaken the UK as far as our GDP goes, and we are the fifth largest economy. So I think it will be a win-win situation. The UK has a lot to offer to India in terms of technology and education, etc. And we obviously offer a huge market to any country, really, but the UK, particularly, especially for their manufacturing. So I think. Uh, it is a win-win situation. The UK knows India well. UK companies have been here, like JCB, for instance, or British Aerospace. They've been here. BAE, they've been here for many years, and they've done a lot of work. So it's not that we are unknown to them or that they are unknown to us. India, if I remember last, I think Indian company was the second largest, if I'm not mistaken, second or third largest investor into the UK. And about 2 years ago, we created, Indian companies created 110,000 jobs in the UK, around that figure. Of course, Tata is a major investor, the Tata Group, but there are others too. And I think it obviously shows that the UK is attractive as far as Indian industry is concerned, and vice versa. So I don't see why we cannot agree on a mutually beneficial uh, trade deal building on each other's complementarities.
Yeah, but as you said, this has been going on for some time. So let us hope, as you said, perhaps by the end of this year, because we were initially hearing maybe by the beginning or the middle of this year. But so it seems unlikely it will take another quite a few months now before anything can be that consensus can happen.
I think I won't want to put a timeline simply because there are issues. We also have been niggardly in terms of signing FTAs. We haven't signed too many FTAs ourselves. So I think both sides obviously want a deal which is best that works for them and which basically benefits them. So I think there will come a point when there will compromises will have to be made, and a call would need to be taken on both sides. But I think that will happen depending on how our relationship progresses overall. And given the good equations that have been established, I do hope that something beneficial, something worthwhile will emerge from all these years of tough negotiations.
Yeah, to go back to this whatever Elon Musk has been saying about the current Prime Minister of the UK and all, do you think that this will eventually go and affect UK US relations, because Mr. Trump is coming into power on the 20th of January, and which way do you, and a lot of the world is in fact looking at how that part goes, because there will be ripples on other countries as well. So, what do you think is going to happen in terms of US and UK?
That's a question that I'm sure everybody's asking on
Yes.
both sides of the Atlantic. Um, it's difficult to predict whether it's going to be a storm in a teacup or whether there is going to be a major disruption. Only time will tell after the 20th of January. But it's quite clear that uh, as far as the Labour Party is concerned, it has its task cut out for it, because if you recall, there was also, I was reading somewhere recently that a large number of Labour activists had gone and campaigned for President Trump, President-elect Trump's opponent in the recent elections. I'm sure that would not be looked favorably by the Trump administration and by the government per se, whether it's in, I'm not sure whether it's breach of US laws or not, but these are issues that unnecessarily roil the relationship. But let's not forget that the relationship between the US and UK is extremely strong and always has been, irrespective of which government has been in power. So we must be mindful of that. So there could be certain disruptions, certain downswings, but I suspect that they would be temporary.
I mean, they're literally brothers in arms. Look at what is going on in terms of Ukraine, for example. I mean, UK and the US have been in the forefront of ensuring that Volodymyr Zelensky does not come to the negotiating table with Russia to think in terms of peace? Do you think is there going to be any progress in that area? I know we are now going into a much broader area, but that is an interest I just have, and I want to know.
I think the whole world is interested in
Yes.
what's going to happen. But going by President elect Trump's pronouncements,
Mhm.
if a deal is done, I think it would, the sooner the better. It would be good for the entire world, entire globe, because the international community, everyone will benefit, because we are all affected in one way or the other adversely by a continuing conflict between Russia and other and Ukraine.
Yeah, but now talking about in less than a week, Donald Trump will be president of the US. Mr. Jaishankar, Dr. Jaishankar is going for the inauguration. Interestingly, Trump had apparently invited Xi Jinping, but Xi Jinping is not coming. So what is going on? Is Xi Jinping snubbing Mr. Trump? What is going on here?
I wish I could answer that question. Only President Xi and the Chinese can, but perhaps there may be other reasons too. I understand he's sending his vice president instead. So it's high enough. And as far as India is concerned, I think there's going to be a meeting of the Quad foreign ministers, I believe, during that. That's a very good move, because that shows very early on bipartisan consensus as far as the Quad is concerned, and the importance of the Quad. So I think that's good that the Quad foreign ministers will be present for the inauguration and hold a meeting, and that should hopefully prepare the ground for the next Quad summit in India.
Okay. So, I mean, one last question I would say on India US specifically. In terms of how India US relations developed when the Biden administration was there were problems. Of course, there were high points. For example, I said and all. But even then, there were many problems. And India kind of was at the receiving end of what seemed like a targeted attack on in terms of human rights. There was what we saw as weaponization of what they called, values based foreign policy. India was one of the primary targets of that. So, I mean, there was enough talk in terms of, things have been derailed and all. There were apparently delays in terms of that I said implementation in terms of the engines and all. Whole lot of delays have also come in. How do you think the relationship will develop under Donald Trump, and whether the I mean, if it has been derailed to an extent, do you think things will be back on track? We have to also see it in terms of what all has been happening in terms of Pannoon, and it's a much broader issue now, actually.
See, the good thing about India-US relations is that it's a multifaceted relationship. It's not a one issue or even a two issue relationship. It's across the spectrum. And I use that term for UK much, I think it exists much more as far as the US is concerned, because our relationship with the US is far deeper. And again, there is bipartisan support for that in Congress and outside. So I think uh, there are blips during the Biden administration. There were blips, you referred to them, but a lot of important things happened also. You mentioned, I said, the G20, the way the G20 was conducted very smoothly in India. Credit to our Prime Minister and his team for the optimum results that we got in terms of reaching a consensus, and the roles played by the key players, including United States. President Biden was here at that time. And we also had a situation where India and the US have upgraded in various fields. The IMEC, for instance, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, stymied because of the conflict in the Middle East in Gaza, but an excellent idea all the same. Then the I2U2, again, an initiative that enjoys bipartisan support. So I think these are initiatives which have been taken which benefit all parties concerned, not just India. And as far as the case you mentioned about Panun, etc., I mean, there is a context to it, and we must understand the context. I'd like to go back to what you'd asked me about Khalistan and the space given to Khalistanis. Obviously, that is something of great concern to us. And if governments were to act on our concerns, at the very minimum, put a lid on, violence directed against our diplomatic missions, that itself would be a big thing. And also, as far as the propaganda, well, it's covered under free speech. Even hate speech apparently is covered under free speech and freedom of expression. But I'm not the expert on laws of these countries, so I won't know. But certainly, if something like that happened in India, we would be very, very careful, and we would monitor very closely such speech against another friendly country. We'd be very particular about that. So I think there have been blips, but then that's natural in such a close relationship which encompassing so many fields. I think as far as the Trump administration is concerned, we'll have to wait and see. But going by past experience of his first administration, I think we managed pretty well. And the personal chemistry between the two leaders also helped. But apart from that, I think right down the line, there is a recognition in both the countries that a closer relationship benefits both.
Yeah, I know I mentioned that was the last question, but no, actually, this is going to be the last question. You know, there is this because of what all has happened in Bangladesh and everywhere. I mean, primarily in the last 4 years in particular, there is this belief in a section of the population, of course, which takes interest in such matters, that there is this big, bad, deep state. Okay, now deep state is directing the US policy towards India, UK policy towards India. Does this deep state actually exist? And do you think it is it okay to see things, that big bad people in such black and white terms?
I think sometimes we get carried away also in making these sort of distinctions and coming up with this nomenclature. But certainly, interests of countries are permanent, irrespective, or especially in foreign policy and international security issues. So, irrespective of the party in power, there is obviously a continuity, and whether it's in terms of the bureaucracy, the civil servants, or whether it's in terms of just the policies per se, there is a continuity. So if there is, I mean, one should not expect radical changes, in policy or in direction when one party is voted out and the other party is comes in or assumes power. But yes, certainly there will be changes in nuances, perhaps changes in emphasis. So we might see something different emerge, but we should be expecting that the slate will be sort of uh, whitewashed or washed clean completely. It won't happen that way, but certainly new people, new policies, a new political leadership will impart a different sort of impetus to the bilateral relations.
So we shouldn't get too carried away by this deep state conspiracy theory, perhaps.
I'm not really competent to comment on how deep the deep state is, but I
Yes.
just wanted to sort of
Okay.
indicate that there are certain permanent interests, and there are people who remain. Where you understand the top echelons might change, but for instance, and it happens in India too. It happens everywhere in any democracy.
The state
Uh,
remains.
the state, the permanent civil service, especially in countries like India and the UK, but also to an extent in the US too. Not because there you have the cleaning up and the other people come in middle levels and at senior levels. But yes, I think the fact is that policies by and large remain the same. There will be, as I said, changes in nuances and emphasis, but that we'll have to wait and see.
And ultimately, what will matter is the interest of the country.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you so much for coming for this show.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yes, it was a great discussion. Thank you, viewers, for watching. Until the next time.